Hi, welcome to Hillcrest Sermons, growing together.
Show us your heart's delight.
Hello, welcome. My name is James. I'm one of the pastors here, and feeling kind of full in here this morning. I don't know what is going on. I see some second service people here. I see a few of you all normally. Is there something going on today? Yeah, I feel like right now, if I were to guess, if I were gauging, I mean, there's like, Argentina seems represented here. Is that where we're at here? Anybody else? Spain? We have any Spain people? Okay, we do have some. Okay, so, this is an example of the church being the church. We are family, okay? So, for those of you that don't have any clue what we're talking about, today is the World Cup final at 12. So while we're finishing the service up, some people will be tempted to be on their phones, the ones that didn't come to first service. So anyways, okay, here we are, Sunday morning. It's been a few weeks since we've been in our 10 Words of Life series. I don't know if anybody else appreciated the guest speakers that we've had over the last couple of weeks, but I think it's been such a treat. Tim, thank you for connecting us with quality thinkers. I feel like each one of those speakers really helped our thinking, really helped me understand God more, and so thanks for helping to set that up. It's beautiful I think that those people decided to stop here on a Sunday is just really awesome. So, and now we're back to the 10 Words of Life series. The 10 Commandments, some of you might know, but in the Hebrew, it actually, the language is the 10 Words of Life. And the 10 Words of Life began with God reminding Israel that He is the one who rescued them out of slavery. They're in this new season where they're no longer enslaved in Egypt. And He, before He gives them any sort of instruction, He reminds them who He is, and their relationship to Him is that He desires the best good for this people. So all of these words come out of that place. And He reminds them that they are now a freed people. They're no longer under the Pharaoh's rule and reign. And what they experienced there in that kingdom was a kingdom that never stopped for them, right? They were constantly pushed to their limits as a people. They were seen as tools to be used. There was no rest for them, and there was not dignity for them. And this is where these 10 words come from. So we read the 10 words today. The first word has to do with exclusive loyalty. We've been through that a few weeks ago. No other gods before Him. The second word had to do with idols. We're not meant to kind of take God and put Him into a box that we can control. The third word is that we are not to misuse God's name, which Tim helped us to understand that that's more about representing His character, that His people actually represent His character in the world. And then that brings us today to the fourth word, which is Sabbath. So whenever I talk about Sabbath, I have to tell you about a little problem that I have when I travel, okay? I mean, this is the first time I've talked about Sabbath, but so it's 100% of the time. But when I travel, I have this problem with ice cream, okay? And as I've been reflecting on this, I've kind of gone back to my sophomore year of high school. I was on a choir tour in Europe. We went to 7 different countries, but this particular day we were in Germany in this kind of like walled town. It was a really cute, quaint place. And I had walked by this like gelato shop, and I was like, yeah, I need some of that. And I got in there, and it was just like, whoa, this is so good. And so then we were there for a couple days. So on the last day that we were there, I had 36 scoops of ice cream before the day was over. And I'll just have to tell you that this was not Edaline Dairy Scoops, okay? Some of you no Edaline. It wasn't an American scoop of ice cream. It was a European scoop of ice cream, like little smaller ones, right? And so that might be where my problem began. So if you fast forward to 2019, I was on a trip to Israel with Tim. Tim and Christian were leading one of our Hillcrest study tours. Was anybody else on that trip? There's a few of you there. You may remember this, okay? So there are witnesses in the room. I walked outside of the city, the old city of Jerusalem. We were in this mall, and I walked past this place called Golda. And I was just drawn in because it was a gelato shop, all right? So I saw this one right here, okay? This might not be, some of you are chocolate people, I'm not that. Watermelon and fresh mint. And I was like, I must have that, okay? So I went there, and it was everything. I don't know if you guys remember Michelle and Shannon. They were both missionaries with the college ministry. It was everything that I hoped it was, okay? I only had 2 scoops that day. Oh, with that cone. But so what happened was we were in Jerusalem for several days. So I was at Golda. They knew us there by the time. And when I'm excited about something, I do tell people about it. So I was like, we got to go to Golda. Who's going to Golda with me? Late night trip. And then we had a whole group mob down there, and we would get it. The favorite ice cream, which was over here, was Cookie Man. I don't know what that meant, but that was the favorite of the group. And then one hot Saturday, we had spent time out and about. It was a hot Saturday afternoon, and I was like, guess what, y'all? It's time for Golda. Got a group together. We walked across the street to the mall. And when we walked in the mall, it was like nothing I'd ever experienced before. There was not a soul in sight. This was like an outdoor mall, so it was an outdoor promenade, and there were shops on each side. There was not one person anywhere. Nothing was open. There were no lights on. There was nobody cleaning anything. And I walked up to Golda, and I could see the fresh mint through, and I'm, what is happening? And then we realized we're in Israel, and Sabbath is from Friday at sundown to Saturday at sundown. And I realized at that time that I had never been in a place where everything shuts down. The thing I had been the closest experience I'd had to that, which maybe some of you can identify with this, but is whenever you want a chicken sandwich on a Sunday and Chick-fil-A is closed, it happens to me every time. Like, okay, I'm glad their workers are resting, but I want my sandwich. So I was pretty annoyed at that, that I couldn't get it. But it caused me to ask this question, right? Like, this was a new experience. I'd never experienced anything like this. It caused me to ask this question. What does it do to a people when they have the structure that causes them to rest, right? And what would it do in me if I were to experience and set my life up like that, where I could experience real rest? And so that's what we're talking about today, Sabbath. Okay, I imagine that there are some in this room that you have kind of a rich rhythm of refreshing Sabbath in your life. I would imagine that there are some in this room who are like, what is that word? Sabbath? What are you saying, Sabbath? And yeah, just don't, this may be the first time that you have thought or talked about that, and that's okay. I imagine there are some here who know about Sabbath, who've thought about Sabbath, and then kind of on a regular routine, you feel guilty about the fact that you don't have rhythms of rest in your life, right? And then there are probably some that are like, I know about Sabbath, and it just feels like impossible. I could never experience that in my life. Just my life would never allow that. And so just as we continue, I think a simple definition of what are we talking about with Sabbath? We'll get into it in the scripture, but Sabbath is a day that was meant to be set apart, that God invited or commanded his people throughout history to set aside a day to rest and to delight, to stop to stop work. And so I think what's interesting is he gave that command to a people who had not experience something like that because they were slaves in Egypt that were being used up as people. And I think today for us, as we engage with this invitation, this challenge to experience regular rhythms of rest and delight in our lives, is that I don't know if you know this, but the culture in the United States runs in the opposite way from, hey, let's stop and let's cease and let's rest. Does anybody feel that? Okay. I know that USPS used to not deliver on Sundays, and you'd be like, man, I got to wait till Monday to get this package. But guess what? Amazon never stops. So guess who delivers on Sundays now, right? USPS. I don't know about you, those of us with kids. I mean, this weekend I was out in the sun in Linden at the Razfest basketball tournament, kids sports, right? I know there's some Rangers parents in here as well. Sports are constantly eating up weekends for us. I know for many of us, even when we do get time to slow down and rest, the things that we do during that time, or scrolling and just vegging out, aren't actually restful for our soul. And so I think I just want to invite us into, or maybe name, a sharp tension that exists for us right now in our society. This tension that God invites us into a rhythm that is good and right for us, and we live in the midst of a culture and a society and structures that are in sharp contrast to that invitation. And so what do we do with that? As I've been sitting with this idea of Sabbath and what is rest for and all, why would he call us to do that? I have been thinking about sleep deprivation. I don't know if any of you have, I don't know if this is happens at a certain age or if it's just me, but have any of you experienced that kind of 3 a.m. wake up where you're just every single day you wake up at that time and then sometimes you can get back to sleep and sometimes you don't? Well, I've had seasons where I wake up at 3 a.m. and I can't get back to sleep, which that means that I've had 4 hours of sleep or 5 maybe for the night. And I would call that, when that goes on for a while, sleep deprivation, right? If those of you that have experienced that, you know what this means. You actually still have to live your life, right? You're still, I still got to go to work. I still got to get my kids where they go. But what happens to you over time is that your human experience begins to get degraded, right? And then you're kind of, all right, hey, yeah, I'm cool. I'm sleep deprived, but that's just what the new normal is. And as I've sat with this topic this week, I think I am now convinced that we as a people are probably generally rest deprived, right? And so we'll talk about that more today. The big idea for today, if you only remember one thing from this message today, it would be this: we can survive without rest, but we were never meant to just survive. We can survive without rest, but we were never meant to just survive. So let's get into Scripture and look at this a little more intentionally here. So I would invite you to get out Bibles, Bible apps. We're looking at Exodus chapter 20, beginning in verse 8. And I invite you to turn there as we look at this. All right, so this passage begins with, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. And it continues. We're pausing at mid-sentence, but I just want to walk through this passage a bit. All right, so this is an interesting command or word of life, because it doesn't begin with do this or don't do this. It really begins with the word remember, right? Remember. And that word, I'm learning from Tim about hey, what does that Hebrew word mean? And does that actually fit with the English that I'm used to? When I think of remember, sometimes it's just hey, just remember where your keys are, right? This is kind of recalling. But this is actually, the word zakor is the word remember here. And that is a much more emphatic word. And it's hold continually in view. Okay? So this intentional hold continually in view, and then act from it. Act from what you're holding in front of you, okay? So remember the Sabbath. What do we remember? We're remembering the Sabbath day. And the Sabbath day, the root word for Sabbath is actually an action, and that is to cease or to stop. So remember the day of ceasing and stopping. Okay? And as we continue on, by keeping it holy, and this, the intention behind this, these are the same words, keeping it holy. It's the same words that were used for the Levites, right? There's this tribe of Levites. They were set apart as people that would work as priests in the temple. And so they were set apart and kept holy, set apart. And so remember the day of ceasing by keeping it set apart, intentionally set apart for worship of God. All right? 6 days you shall labor. Labor is the same word here that would be used for servants or slaves. So like work in that kind of sense. And do all of your work. In 6 days, do all of your work. This word right here, work, is the word melaka. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. But that word specifically has to do with production, right? Purposeful, skilled production. So 6 days, you'll labor and do all of your producing, your outputs, your productive outputs, your productive work. And it's tied to identity, it's tied to making. And so hold on to that word, that melaka word, and we'll continue on. Verse 10 goes on, and there's a list in verse 10 here. So on 6 days do all your work, but on the seventh day, it's a Sabbath day to the Lord, a day of ceasing to the Lord. And on that day, you shall not do any work, the melaka production. And so this is spoken to a patriarchal society, right? So head of household is kind of being spoken to here. And this is so interesting what God is doing in this. So you as the head of household need to stop and cease your productive work. And then it says neither you, and then there's a list of who else should also cease and stop that productive work. And this list, I mean, we can get into it, but this list is interesting. It's not exhaustive, but there are 7 stops on that list, which generally writers of the Old Testament would use that as a way to say, if you notice this list, it's, son or daughter, male or female servants, animals, foreigners residing with you. There are 7 items on that list, which actually means that everyone, right? It's a holistic list. And so if you are a head of household, the rest is for you, and also it obligates you to ensure that those downstream from you, those who you have influence over, also experience that rest, which that would be very countercultural to these people, right? So when I think about that for today, what does that mean for us? I think a real easy one is parents. Does Sabbath rest flow from you down to your kids? Do you make that possible? I think maybe in the workplace, what would it look like for us to flow that kind of rest down to the people that are under us? And this is challenging because our society is not set up like this, but I think this is what we're being encouraged to consider here. Verse 11 goes on, and whenever you see the word for, it's kind of like this. Now I'm telling you the rationale for this command above. Because, why should we do this? Because in 6 days, God made everything that we know, and then he rested on the 7th day. And that is the rationale for why his people should keep the Sabbath, because this is what he did. And I think there are rhythms and routines in all of creation. There are rhythms and routines in each of our bodies, right? Every single night, we are meant to go to sleep, to stop, right? That tells us something about how God created things. And he's saying the way that he even created the earth and everything that we know, there's rhythms attached to it. Work and then rest, and then work and then rest. And he's calling us to get in sync with those rhythms that he created because he did it. And so before sin, before slavery, before any of that, God had created this rhythm. And so he invites us to get in sync with that. So here, what does Sabbath mean for us? And these are a couple of just thoughts, insights that I wanted to share with you. But I think the first thing I might say about what does Sabbath mean for us to observe the Sabbath, it is actually an act of fulfilling the first commandment, which is to have no other gods before us, right? I used to think that there's a statement that I learned in my time in college that if you want to know a person's values, you look at how they spend their money. And I think that that's true, but I think I've come to think about this week, that how a person spends their time is also a very clear indicator of what they value, right? And every one of us has the same number of hours in a day. Every one of us has the same amount of time in a week, same amount of time in a year. And so how we each spend our time communicates a lot about our values. And so you shall have no other gods before me. Is that reflected in our time? Another thing that was drawn out for me is that word meleka, work, producing. I think for us in our setting, we often need to hear that our worth is not tied up in our production, how useful we are, what we're producing for our work, that we are not so important that we can't stop and cease like God calls us to. I think we need to hear that. And then I think another thing that I'll draw out is that Sabbath, in what God did in creation, was not just a passive day off. Sabbath is meant to be an intentional ceasing, to delight in what God has made. And we've talked here at Hillcrest, we've talked about these kind of 4 relationships that we tend to. And Sabbath is meant for us to cease our productive work, to delight and rest in our relationship with God, our relationship with others, our relationship with ourselves, and our relationship with creation. Okay, so that is what Sabbath is meant to do. One of the things I wanted to highlight, I don't want to get too much into this. It's so fun that Tim has the podcast, the Deep Dive podcast, because sometimes when I'm like, Tim, there's like too much to talk about in this sermon, and there's this big debate about Sabbath, and then I was like, you know what I can do? I can just say, Tim will probably talk about that debate in the Deep Dive podcast. So if you haven't listened to the podcast, he's already started podcasting about what does rest look like for the believer. It's a great episode, and I bet after right now there will be a podcast about this debate that I'm about to tell you about. Okay, so some people there's debate. Some people read this 10 words of life, this command, remember the Sabbath. And they are like, this is a moral law that we must follow to this day. And it's still an expectation. And then other believers would say, this particular commandment has actually been fulfilled in Christ. And if you look through the New Testament, you can read New Testament authors that seem to indicate those kind of things. And so I'm excited to hear what Tim says about all of that stuff. For today, where I'm coming from is that God created these rhythms that it is most wise for us to listen to his instruction to follow. Okay? I don't actually want to get into that debate today, but just that what is in agreement between this debate about Sabbath is that rest is good, that God wants us to have rest, and that we really ought to pursue that. Okay? So look forward to that podcast. So Darrell Johnson, in his book, I'll actually put a couple of books later on. He did a book on the 10 words of life. He gave us this kind of how do we live out Sabbath in our lives today. And so I've taken what he's done and framed these as questions. These are questions that I would encourage you to reflect on this week. All right, so the first question is, do you actually desire Sabbath rest. So how do you live out the Sabbath? The first thing that would be most important is, do you desire Sabbath rest? I think if we were all to really stop and be rid of the distractions, I think many of us would be able to say with clarity that we're probably not as rested as we should be. And God, way back when he gave the 10 words of life, knew that you could not be rested because you were slaves and they wouldn't allow you to rest. But I think he also knew that this is important for us. And so Darrell Johnson just gets into, do you desire Sabbath rest? Next, he goes into, will you decide to trust the Lord of the Sabbath? To begin to set intentional time aside in our lives for that kind of rest, it actually requires us to decide that we're going to do that, right? I think if we passively flow through life, this probably won't happen. And so will you decide to trust him with this and to trust his words about what is good and right and best for you? The third thing is, what needs to change in our lives to make Sabbath possible, right? And I think this is a complicated question. I just shared with you about my own life and with kids and different seasons, but what needs to change? The next is, how will you seek God? If you decide to pursue Sabbath, how will you seek God in those kind of four directions? How will you seek to delight in God? How will you seek to delight in refreshing relationships? How will you seek to enjoy and delight in creation? And I think the one that I left off of here was, how will you seek to delight and be refreshed yourself? And then the last thing is, how will you celebrate the Sabbath? Johnson talked a lot about Sabbath as, it's like one of the best holidays that happens weekly, right? So we have all these traditions. Some of you are, I was talking to Rylan over here, who's newer. She was like, I just moved here and I have all this holiday decorations that I gotta have. And so, many of us have these decorations we pull out for holidays. And I think celebrating the Sabbath, it's good practice for us to have. How will I set this day apart? How will this day look different than other days? And I know for myself, just sharing with you about my own experience with Sabbath. When I was single, man, my Sabbath was awesome. Like, I had this awesome Sabbath rhythm. It was so good. I just didn't, nobody else to contend with the time. And then I got married, and we both share we both share the value of Sabbath, but just the equation's just different, right? And if you don't readjust and ask the question, how do I Sabbath now that the equation's different, then you can kind of drift for a while. So then we get some rhythms in place, and then you have a kid, and you're like, oh shoot, how do you do? What happens when your work is your kid? I can't just ignore them for the whole day. What do I do there? And so I think what I want to say, and then I could explain all the other different transitions, but I think at every transition in our life, it's important for us to stop and ask, what does this look like in this season of life? Okay? And if we don't do that, I think oftentimes then we default to not experiencing rest. And I want to acknowledge that there are tensions in the room. There are people here that are in healthcare, and it's like, hey, if I don't answer the phone, somebody's life might be in danger. I think there are people whose jobs don't allow for this kind of rest. I think, there's a lot of barriers, but I think what God would say to each one of us is, it's important that we take time to intentionally ask this question: what does rhythms of rest and Sabbath look like in my life? And just to begin answering. We don't have to answer that question all the way, but I think we need to begin answering those questions in our lives. And so I think a concrete step I might challenge each of you here in this room is to ask that question. what would need to happen in my life to set a day or some time aside to begin experiencing this intentional rest, right? Put a date on a calendar to begin exploring this practice. And there are 3 books that I mentioned. Do we have a slide for that, BJ? Nope. Okay. Well, the 3 books are, let's see, I'm thinking about the awesome That You May Live by Darrell Johnson, The Rest of God, which is by Mark Buchanan, and then Sacred Rhythms by Ruth Haley Barton. I'll try to get a slide for that. But those are the 3 books. And if you need to remember those books, you can go back to the YouTube feed. This will be on YouTube. So there you go. Those are all, I think, excellent books. What I'm trying to do is just convince us that this is something we should be thinking about. And I think those books will help take the next step. And we encourage there. So I think we can survive without rest, but we're never made to just survive. Right? God wants us not to just appear to be restful, but he actually wants us to experience a deep rest. And so I don't want anybody to hear kind of as I bring up, I want this to be heard as an invitation from God to each of us, okay? Not like a shame, you haven't done this. It's an invitation. And so a lot of times as I'm preparing for these times, I ask God, like, a lot of times I envision myself right here in this space, and I ask God, what do you want to say to these people, your people that gather together, my church, my community? What is your heart for them? And so I want to invite the worship team up. And the way I want to close it is I just want to share with you the things that I sensed that God wanted to say to this group. But I want to say it from the first person voice. So I'm not God. I can't promise you that this is exactly what he would say to you. So this is for your discernment. You have to discern this. But I just want you to hear the kinds of things that I think that he would say to our community about Sabbath, okay? So I invite you to, you can close your eyes or leave them open, whatever you want to do. But I want you to hear, I think I heard from God for us, and I just want you to hear what I heard. I see how tired you are. Do you see it? Do you see that what has become normal for many of you is actually not where I intended you to be at? Do you see it? You're not the first people to be tired in life. I gave this word of life to people long ago. And I invited them into a new way to be in sync with the rhythms that give the most amount of life. And so, what I say to you today is remember the gift that I gave you. Remember the gift of Sabbath. This gift that is meant to cause you to delight, to rest, to delight in relationship with me, to delight in relationship with those that I've created, that's your family and your friends, your community, to delight in the creation, and even to delight internally. I want this for each one of you. Parents, remember that your kids are watching you. I want for your kids to experience a life of rest and refreshment and not a life that is always run on empty. Will you show them the ways? In all the ways that we can, will we flow this rest down to those that you have influence over? And remember that this invitation to rest that I give to you was never meant to be a burden. It's meant to be an invitation towards life. You can survive without rest, but you're never made to just survive. And so, come and rest. Amen.
Thanks for listening. For more info, visit hcbellingham.com and join us any Sunday, 9 and 11 a.m.